What is deep carbon? That's the question I want to answer today on Science Spotlight number 7 on deep carbon existence and properties. I'm Dr. Mark Williamson. Let's get started. So, a good place to start is this short article, Why Deep Carbon by Dr. Hazen and Dr. Schiffries. This was in 2013, where they went over deep carbon. Some of the highlights of this article was that Earth's interior is actually unique in carbon behavior when it comes to planets, and that the deep interior might hold most of the carbon, over 90%, whereas the carbon in the atmosphere, the oceans, the biosphere is just a small fraction of total carbon. And deep carbon is not well understood, and so there's a lot of questions out there, like how much carbon is actually stored? Where are the reservoirs? How does carbon move? What about fluxes? What about abiotic sources of things like methane? And how does deep organic chemistry play a role in life's origins? Another main point from this article is that the carbon cycle matters for humans. It matters for economics, the environment, and also involves deep microbial life. A great quote from this article is that carbon in Earth represents a synthesis of a diverse body of research in physics, chemistry, biology, and the Earth and space sciences. So really, there's something for every kind of scientist when we talk about deep carbon. And this is just the surface, because it turns out deep carbon is the introduction to an entire review called Carbon in Earth. But we'll get back to that review later. Because it turns out you really can't talk about deep carbon without talking about the Deep Carbon Observatory, which really sort of kicked off the research of deep carbon. So what is the Deep Carbon Observatory? Well, it was a global research program on carbon's role on Earth that really went from 2009 to 2020. Unfortunately, they do have sort of a static website, but it's really not up to date. It says 2020. Most of the information about it initially I had to find on Wikipedia. But this program, the Deep Carbon Observatory, had a variety of research programs. Reservoirs and fluxes, deep life, deep energy, and then extreme physics and chemistry were the 4 different programs. They had a lot of interesting research highlights, including ultra deep diamond research, research on the deep biosphere, and other things like iron carbides, volcanic fluxes, and ancient saline fluids. So the Deep Carbon Observatory is a go-to resource for deep carbon science. Which brings us back to that review. Turns out Carbon in Earth, this Reviews in Mineralogy and Geochemistry Volume 75, was put out by the Deep Carbon Observatory, which again isn't just one organization, but many organizations, hundreds of scientists all coming together to work on this project. So in this review has a great overview of a variety of different research areas within deep carbon. There's actually 19 different chapters. I was actually able to find a physical copy in my university's geology library, 698 pages. So I could do, for this overview, really only scratch the surface, look through it. But here are some notable articles that I want to briefly look at more. So the first 2, Structure, Bonding, and Mineralogy of Carbon in Extreme Conditions and Carbon Mineral Evolution, goes over, how carbon appears on Earth. Graphite, diamond, other man-made forms. But then this graph here I really like is as temperature and pressure increases, how does carbon show up? A lot of times it's diamond at high pressures and temperatures. At lower, it's graphite, but it also could be liquid when it gets really hot, no matter the pressure. And then carbon mineral evolution. I never really thought about minerals evolving, but table 1 in that shows the stages of mineral evolution. You start with billions of years ago. There's things like diamond, graphite, etc. But then as Earth accretes materials, crust and mantle reworks, and even biological mineralization, you can get more and different types of carbon minerals. 2 other interesting articles, the in-gassing storage and outgassing of terrestrial carbon through geologic time and diamonds in geology of mantle carbon, were really interesting images. The first one showing just how the Earth, in the Hadrian period, young Earth was very different and had different properties and movement of carbon compared to the mature Earth in the Phanerozoic onward. And then I love this map actually of diamond types across the Earth, from lithospheric to super deep diamonds, and even things like impact diamonds. So that was really cool. And then finally, the last three deal with the deep biosphere, so microbes in the subsurface. There's the nature and extent of the deep biosphere, including a table on how you actually collect that data. There's serpentinization, carbon and deep life, talking about different archaea in serpentine habits. There's also a table on bacteria. And then finally, the deep virosphere, looking at the ecological and evolutionary impacts of virology, of viral populations on the microbial populations. So that was very interesting. So, Deep Carbon Observatory had that carbon and Earth, but later on, they actually had a decadal report because they were funded and did this research over about 10 years. So there's a 60-page report in 2019, going over deep carbon science, history, strategy, the different communities, different discoveries. But the real take-home point in this report is their list of 10 transformational discoveries in a decade of their research. They found that the deep biosphere is among the largest ecosystem on Earth, that rocks and fluids in Earth's crust provide clues to the origins of life. They found that much of volcanic carbon flux seeps out of fractures and faults unassociated with eruptions. They found that volcanic CO2 flux may be used to forecast eruptions, and that deep carbon cycle through deep time reveals long-term stability of atmospheric CO2, punctuated by large perturbations. They found that Earth harbors a wide range of previously unknown carbon-bearing minerals, and that abiotic methane forms in the crust and mantle of Earth. They found that diamond inclusions provide evidence of an ocean of water within the mantle and high-pressure materials never seen before in natural samples. They found that fluids move and transform carbon deep within Earth, and they found that 2/3 of the Earth's carbon might be in the iron-rich core. So these are really fascinating discoveries about carbon in the deep Earth. Here's some fascinating pictures from that report. This is using drones to get atmospheric gas measurements from volcanoes, actually putting constant sensors, measurement devices at volcanoes to measure flux, ultra-deep diamonds. There's this device they developed to take microbial samples and keep them pressurized to analyze them under pressure in the lab and like their natural environment. And also the development of a spectroscopy device to determine between biotic and abiotic formed methane. There's other useful, fascinating graphics in this report, like how CO2 and other gases come from different types of volcanoes, the evolution of minerals across deep time, different subsurface biomes for microbes, and as well as overall carbon fluxes. So that wasn't the only thing the Deep Carbon Observatory did. More recent work, they have Deep Carbon Past to Present. That was a 2019 large book, another 600+ page book. I hope to dig more into. But they also have more recent papers like the 2018 paper, Biomass and Biodiversity of the Continental Subsurface, where they estimate actually the global subsurface prokaryotic biomass. And they found it to be 23 to 31 petagrams of carbon, whereas previous biomass estimates were 1.3 to 110,000. So a more constrained number. And they used a special continental subsurface biosphere database with over almost 4,000 cell concentration measurements and sophisticated modeling. On the sort of static Deep Carbon Observatory website, they have several papers from 2020, though not any later. There's carbon-boron clathrates as a new class of sp3 bonded framework materials, which dealt with designing and synthesizing carbon structures that are light and strong like diamond. There was the carbonate geochemistry of Enceladus's ocean, where they dealt with geochemical interpretations of Cassini mass spectrometry data for Saturn's moon, Enceladus. There was modulating the H-bond strength by varying the temperature of the high-pressure synthesis of nitrogen-rich carbon nanothreads, bit of a mouthful, but dealing with effective synthesis of carbon nanothreads. And then impacts of deep-sea mining on microbial ecosystem services, which suggests a baseline of microbial diversity, biomass, and importantly, biogeochemical function, which is needed for a good assessment. So from there, from the Deep Carbon Observatory, I mean, there's still scientists from that observatory, that is a conceptual observatory, who are still doing research. But I try to find sort of current labs doing deep carbon work. One thing I was able to find through the decadal report of some upcoming or ongoing grants, etc. There's the Gordon Research Seminar on Deep Carbon Science, which I believe is still going on, an actual International Center for Deep Life Investigation in China. 2 grants from the German Research Foundation that had started in 2019, the Ocean Floor, Earth Uncharted Interface. There's Carbopat, carbonates at high pressure and temperatures. From European Horizon and Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. There's Science for Clean Energy and Earth 4D, respectively. And then there's actually 3 grants even from NASA, Earth's First Origins, Clever Planets, which is cycles of life, essential volatile elements in rocky planets, and Enigma, evolution of nanomachines in geospheres and microbial ancestors. But then actual labs that seem to be doing current deep carbon or deep carbon related work. I did find this deep carbon lab at Bologna University in Italy, which does have active expeditions and publications as of 2025. And their fundamental scientific question is what sustains life underground? There's also COBRA, Crustal Ocean Biosphere Research Accelerator, which seems to be current as well, which is an international network of networks focused on the structure, function, resilience, and ecosystem services of the crustal ocean biosphere, the rocky part of the seafloor. So with that, here are all the references that I used. If you find that helpful, hopefully diving more into deep carbon was fascinating for you as it was for me. And of course, I just scratched the surface. There's so much more to look into it, so definitely take use of those resources. And certainly like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And please answer the question, what topic should I cover next? Until next time, thanks for joining me.